Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Confidence Connection Show, where we share women's stories of confidence from all around the world. So today I have the lovely Rebeca Chappell with me today, live from Sydney. And Rebeca is a passionate marketer, speaker, podcaster, and soon to be author, which is very exciting. She is the founder of Plum Marketing Solutions, which is a marketing agency which works with service-based organizations with the goal of empowering business owners to remove the stress and overwhelm, to demonstrate that marketing strategies don't need to be overcomplicated, over budgeted, or over fluffy, and they need some humanity and consistency. She's said to be one over enthusiastically actualizing ideas with you or educating you about that logo that you realize is incorrect. She's been called the branding gatekeeper, which is an interesting description, oddly data focused, and an effervescent whiteboard lover. So I love the introduction. So welcome, Rebeca. Thank you so much for being here. Would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself and your background and how you got to be where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you for having me. Such an honor to be on here. So my background, I started in marketing 13 years ago, longer now, it'd have to be 14 years ago, just as a receptionist. I just took a role in reception, and that grew. I started, taking over changing the window, and I went out and did all the photography of the properties. So people hated me, of course, because I made everything look bigger. So I really started realizing I love this and I had this creative passion. And I thought, maybe that's something I need to explore a little deeper. Then the marketing manager of the real estate agency actually left, and I managed to kind of step into her shoes. And from there, I started studying in the evenings, and then progressed my career into a health fund. And then from the health fund, I was the last man standing in my team. The whole team got made redundant around me, and they said, how do you want to restructure this? I was 20, really early 20s at the time, and it was a lot of pressure. I was like, I don't know if I deserve to really. I had some really great consultants working with me, helping, but of course I was still quite young and fresh in my marketing career, but it was a great opportunity for me to kind of, I guess, take the bull by the horns and lead. And then, it was a really great opportunity there. Started working with some awesome consultants, and they sort of planted this seed in my mind about, do I want to be a consultant one day? And they were like, you should be, you've got this, and they were like, you've got it in you. They were saying this behind, obviously, all the managers' backs, because they didn't want me to quit and things. But I ended stepping into this role that I just happened to apply for. It was a really big position in a company that had never had marketing before, because I realized I'd had this passion brew in me where it was like, maybe I can create marketing departments in businesses. So I got the job on the spot, which he'd interviewed 10 people before me, all really high uni grads, and I was like, little old me that just worked my way up essentially. And so I stepped into that role, and then very quickly the company went insolvent. Not my fault, not marketing department's fault. It was a horrible experience, to be honest, and I wouldn't wish that upon anyone, but anyone that's been through a redundancy or an insolvency will understand how hard that can be. And then I stepped into my next role, which was really probably groundbreaking role, I would say. I think everyone has a position where they probably really find themselves and excel their career. And that was my next one. Once again, it was in a company that had never had marketing before, and I stepped into it, and we tripled, actually more than tripled the size of that company in such a short period of time. Yeah, so that was, and then how Plum came to be was, once again, I got headhunted and asked to create marketing in this other company at the end of 2019, so before the 2020 that we know that changed the world. So that was November. I stepped into the role, and really I could tell from probably 2 months in that something wasn't quite right. They really didn't want to take on board any of my advice. They were pushing back a lot. They weren't letting me take the reins. I was doing a lot of admin, which, they kept saying to me, do you think you're above admin? I was like, well, I kind of have built my career to a point where admin's not what I want to do. And then the pandemic hit in April, and I was fired within a week of a kind of lockdown sort of hitting Sydney. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I started Plum, because I was like, well, there's no jobs, and I'd always wanted to try my own thing. And I thought, if not now, when? So I just went for it.
Yeah, that's a big roller coaster of a story there. And I love that you didn't take that traditional route, you know, that you haven't come from the university and stuff. You've just, you know, worked from the ground up and probably got yourself, if you had gone to university, I can imagine you, by the time you left university, where you were was probably a better place anyway, that you weren't, you know, you're probably already making more money and you didn't have all the debt. So great, smart move. And I love that, you know, my next question is about 2020. And I love that you're already well versed with the roller coaster that, you know, so many people in the world faced for the first time last year with redundancies and restructuring and stuff, that you seem to have already been very seasoned with that experience. And I love that you used that initiative to start your business. So like I said, so you went through a lot of change in 2020. Sounds like you were going through a lot of change every year, though. So tell us about the failures that kind of happened that turned into opportunities. I love how you seem to find opportunities in all the failures along the way.
Yeah, 2020 was let's call it the year of Beck's failure. It's very hard for me well, I can say this now because I'm in a very different place, but back then it was very hard for me to face failure. And, you know, obviously, even when that company went insolvent years beforehand, I'd been like, oh, is that my fault? You know, even though obviously it wasn't. The company had been insolvent before they even hired me. Like it was, you know, but I always had this thing where I just felt where was it me? And then so in 2020, in January, actually, so pre-pandemic, my husband turned to me one night and said, I'm not happy. I don't want to be in marriage anymore. And I was like, oh. But interestingly enough, and for me, I'd always said I didn't want to get married and go down the path of divorce. I'd always had this upbringing where divorce wasn't a thing. We didn't believe in it. I was brought up quite traditional. Marriage was for life, regardless. Which now I look back and I laugh at that because I'm like, why would I think that way? You know, if it's a terrible marriage, it's a terrible marriage. But yeah, I was very much and I'd always said to my ex, please don't ask me to marry you if you're not sure, if it's not for life. We'd been together 7 years before we got married, so I thought, yeah, you know, we're pretty solid. And yeah, so he came out and said this in January, and I had the weirdest reaction because it was late at night, we're lying in bed, and I just turned to him and I said, well, if you don't love me, I'm not going to force you to love me. And he was like, I think he was quite taken back by that response. But then I think this is because I'd been on this journey since 2019 of really trying to step into who I was, because I'd been dealing with some pretty heavy depression in 2019, a few things that had sort of happened in my life that I wasn't happy with. And, you know, I guess I probably wasn't happy in life. And I think everything started snowballing in 2020 when I started building my confidence a lot and started doing the work on myself. So this was the first event that kind of really rattled me. And I was like, oh, wow, my marriage is failing. Straight away, I was like, you know, I must be a terrible wife. I went down that path. And then to have work, I was being bullied every day by my boss. She was horrible to me, honestly. She'd walk in, she'd say hi to everyone else and just stare at me and then walk off. She was just not a nice person. Her and her husband would pull me into meeting rooms and have without witnesses and just attack my, you know, who I was as a person and what I was trying to do in the business. So that was the second failure. So I'd never been fired before from a job. I've always been held in quite high esteem by managers. I'd always been promoted, always, you know, had this career of success, to be honest. I would, you know, and I'd always just put it down to a bit of luck instead of actually hard work. But the truth was, it was because I always showed up, right? So that was the second major failing for me. And it was just these two things, it just felt like I was really, I remember sitting, after I lost my job, I remember the week that happened, just sitting crying every day, every night, just thinking I'm a failure. I can't keep a marriage. I can't keep a job. You know, there's a massive pandemic going on. What am I going to do with my life? And that's really it. I hit a rock bottom that I'd not hit before.
Yeah. But I guess at least once you hit rock bottom, the only way is up, right?
100%.
And I feel I've been in that sort of similar position at work, and from what I'm gathering, it's they were headhunting you, but it's they just wanted you to reaffirm their own bad ideas. They didn't actually want to take on new ideas. They just want you in there to be like, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, even though you're running yourself into the ground.
I absolutely love that you say that because I never actually looked at it that way before, but you're right, they did. They wanted me to validate their shitty ideas, like, to be honest. And I was like,
Yeah.
actually, I'm not going to do that because I've never been that kind of person to stem, especially it's interesting because I was a very different person in my career world than I was in my personal world. In my personal world, I was a really big people pleaser. In my career world, it did come into it a bit, but I was also very, very outspoken, which I think is why I'd always done quite well, because I was always like, no, actually, I don't really think that's the right idea. I think we should try this. And I would, move people. But yeah, very different in my people pleaser life, like outside of work. I would be like, yeah, can I do that for you? Okay, cool.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think people, it's a whole saying of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Like these people that you work with, you surround yourself with, they have to have a growth, like an open mindset. You can't force it onto people. So it is interesting when you're open and you come across these people that are almost pretending like they're open, but they're really not. They're just
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I'm a huge believer in law of attraction now. Like I've seen too much happen over the last 18 months to not believe it. And I believe now in my life where I'm at, I would never attract a client like that. And I just don't. In my business, all my clients are so similar to me. They're all these beautiful people that they have, businesses that are genuinely trying to make an impact in this world. And it's like, okay, I'm attracting them to me because obviously I'm putting that out there too, because I want to make a change, So it's nice. And I reflect back on my life when I got offered that role and I was quite unhappy. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on that I hadn't dealt with. And it was like, it made perfect sense that I entered a role that wasn't probably quite right for me.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in all that too. And I can totally agree with all that. So tell us, how do you go from that sort of victim mode to creating an action plan and finding happiness in the last 18 months?
Yeah, so victim mode's an interesting one for me because, and I love talking about it because I have spent a lot of my life there. Like, genuinely, I could tell everyone my sad story. Like, so because, well, I'll tell you now. And the path that I'm on now is really talking to people about victim mode and grief because I lost my dad when I was quite young. I was 21. But prior to losing my dad, I'd actually lost my best friend she was more like my sister in a car accident when I was a teenager. So from literally a teenage years, I'd gotten into this pattern of victim mode and telling people how like, I've had to go through this, like, and really sitting in it. And especially when my dad passed, because I wasn't quite I think because 21, you're still very young. You haven't really done the work on yourself. You don't really know yourself yet. And I remember being so angry at everyone around me being like, oh, why is this happening to me and not you? And like very angry and very like, I would just avoid the fact that this had happened though, because I didn't want to sit with the grief of it. So when everything started happening in 2020, because also as well as the husband leaving, the job ending, there was also thrown in the mix. My father-in-law was very, very sick. He'd been terminal with a brain tumor for 3 years at that point. So they'd given him a year and he'd obviously lasted a lot longer, which was great. We had more time with him on this beautiful planet. But his health started to deteriorate rapidly. So there was, my ex and I trying to see if we could mend things, get things back together, what we were doing. But at the same time, we're going and visiting hospitals 3 times a week. And then I was building a business. So it would have been really easy to the day that I lost my job and the day, knowing that my ex and I were probably not going to last. Like the reality was, I think the night that he said to me, I'm not happy, I think I knew, I think deep down I was like, yeah, because actually this hasn't been working for me either because you've been a bit of a dick. And so would I as well. Like it was, it takes 2 people to break a relationship and I 100% can own my part in it. I know it very well now, but it would have been really easy to sit there and be like, well, I'm stuffed. There's nothing I can do. But I think I definitely sat in the grief of it this time instead of trying to avoid, because the interesting thing about the pandemic and all of this happening at that time was you couldn't make yourself so busy to avoid your situation. Whereas I think in life, when you're not in a lockdown, you can make yourself incredibly busy so you don't actually notice the pain of what you've gone through. And so I was forced to really every single day of my life face these things that were going on and actually go, what do I want from my life? And I started getting really excited, which was the first time in a long time I'd started really dreaming about what I wanted from my life. And so I think a little switch turned in me, and I realized that the victim mode wasn't going to work anymore. And I realized I actually could call out the behavior, which I'd never been able to do before. And I think it's because my pain had gotten so bad that I just couldn't ignore it. And I realized that actually maybe it's you, Beck. Like maybe it's time you need to change instead of trying to change everything around you, like jobs and, you know, in the past I've been boyfriends and then like friends and whatever. It was actually time to go internal and face that. So that was sort of, I guess, the switch that turned in me.
Yeah, and I think so many people can relate to that, because I feel that period, especially during the first set of lockdowns, it was just like this period of reflection, right? I think everyone had that, and I like you summed it up so well, that we couldn't distract ourselves anymore. We were stuck at home with ourselves. You know, there's so many stories of people's relationships breaking down because for the first time they actually had to spend time together. Like, how easy is it to be in a convenient relationship where you're both working, you know, taking the kids wherever, doing different things, and you know, you're not actually spending much time together, so you don't actually realize
what you're like. I always joke with people because I'm like, no, mine was a pre-pandemic breakdown. Like, we decided we didn't want to be together before that, and then actually stayed in the same house the entire lockdown.
For me, I was lucky enough that our relationship did the opposite, with having more time together. We actually got stronger, which is great. But I think that happened on both ends of the spectrum, and just in life in general, that you're right, you couldn't escape any problems. You just had to face them, be like, is this what I really want when all of this is over? Is this the life I want to come back to? And I think for so many people it's not, and so many people are like, I just can't wait for normal. I'm like, the normal's gone. Whatever you had before pandemic is gone, because whether you like it or not, you're going to reflect and you're going to change and grow, and you're going to, just things are going to be different. You're going to want something different, and the world you come back to is going to be different. So even if you don't change, everyone around you has changed and reflected and grown. So there just was no choice. Everyone had to reflect and grow during that time, and I loved it. I feel like it was a great global reset. It's like a big reset button, and I think it's great. But apart from the actual pandemic part of it,
and I do think like that, you know, they talk about how mental health issues rose so much through the pandemic, and I don't necessarily think it was because, like, definitely there was an element because of the isolation, but I also think there was a huge element there of people actually like going, hey, I'm not happy in general, like, and I think it's a really hard place to actually admit that you're not happy, because we spend so long, you know, and I actually did a post about this last night on Insta. We spend so long putting on Instagram our highlight reel, and I was in this world as well. Like, I was so competitive, like, you know, oh, my life is perfect, like, and wanted to have this display, even though I actually always have spoken very honestly about certain things in my life not being perfect, like my mental health, or, you know, and I've gotten a lot more vocal about those sorts of things. But was the very first time I actually had to really face up to the fact that I hadn't dealt with a lot of grief, and it was all coming at me. I hadn't dealt with, you know, my mental health was probably the healthiest part of me at that point, which was weird because I'd done so much work in 2019 on my depression and my anxiety, so that actually all of this kind of happened at the right time, which sounds very bizarre, but yeah.
No, I can relate. I almost feel like I needed that time myself in my own life. Was what I was going through, and I grew this whole law of attraction stuff. I feel like the pandemic for me happened at the right time in my life too, where I could make that shift and that change and go in a new direction too. So it is interesting how people look at the whole situation that happened. But moving on, so tell us, how did you overcome imposter syndrome when you went out and started your business?
Oh, this one's a hard one, because actually imposter syndrome still comes up for me, right? Like, I still get it. I'm very good now at ignoring it. And it was interesting. I have a really good mentor called Janine Garner, and she kind of taught me, it was interesting. So when I first started out in business, I knew that I needed people in my corner. I didn't know what those people looked like, but I was like, oh, this is going to be really lonely if I don't meet really intelligent people that have done this before me, because I always say, and I stole this saying off someone, but I can never remember who I stole it off. But every time I say it, people are like, it's amazing. And I'm like, well, but it's success leaves breadcrumbs, right? So I started looking around at like, okay, who to me looks really successful and who do I love? Not even necessarily successful, but who looks, confident and who looks like they've got their shit together, and like, who do I want to like learn off? So I started, putting feelers out. I joined, we've got, I think you guys have got it in New Zealand too, Business Chicks, the group of Business Chicks, really, really good. Great community.
We might do.
Yeah, it was a really good community. It started by Emma Isaacs, like really, really great for like, I guess, women, heading up their own businesses. So I joined Business Chicks really quickly because I'd always had this aspiration of joining them anyway. So it was kind of cool now because I had a business, so I like fit in. And I did that and started going to the fortnightly like catch-ups that were virtual because of the pandemic, which was great because I ended up meeting all these women from across Australia. Then one day, one of the girls on the Facebook group put a call out for, women that had been through, I guess, a traumatic time and needed like, and how they'd kind of dealt with it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's me. Like, so I ended up like reaching out to this woman called Anna. We connected and I ended up going to her Female Frontier weekend. And it was really at this weekend that I had to like learn what my values were, what my purpose was like, and she actually really made us like think about who we are. So I was still doing this deep work that I didn't realize at the time how important it is to do for your own development. But it got me in touch with Janine Garner, who she taught me to kind of name your imposter syndrome. So like give it a name, give it a character. So every single time it shows up, you're like, not today, like we don't have time for this conversation, and actually like talk back to it and say, I know I'm recognizing that you're here, like I can feel you and I can see you, hear you, but we're not talking today. Like I don't have time for you. And that was that's the way that I've actually learned to best deal with it. And the other thing is I always remind myself when I'm doubting what I'm doing or someone questions what I'm doing, like because sometimes, especially with me, because I put a lot of pretty like not controversial, but I put some pretty like I guess deep experiences of mine out into the world, and I'm happy to share them. And a lot of people that have known me from past back get really uncomfortable with me doing this, like as in it's uncomfort for them because they don't see me in this light. And I'm like, well, if I don't say these things about grief or if I don't say these things about depression, there's a girl out there that's like I was when I was having chronic anxiety in my 20s, like could barely sit in a meeting without wanting to run to the toilet, like could barely had head spins. I was a really sick girl. And mental health was so shunned at that point. I couldn't have gone to my boss and said, I have chronic anxiety, I need a month off. There's no way back then I would have lost my job. And it's like, if I don't say the things that I say now, and I'm not so honest about what it's like to actually face a divorce and, have the love of your life turn to you and say, I don't want to be together anymore. Like it's horrible, but because I've done the work and I've healed on it, I can happily talk about it and say, it's okay that it's horrible, but you are okay. You're going to, grow through it. And so I think the imposter syndrome still comes up a lot of the time, especially I know when I release the book, I'm going to have a lot of like, but I think I remind myself, if I don't say this, there's a girl out there that was like me that couldn't find anyone relatable on the internet, that couldn't find anyone that was on the same journey as me, that was having the same difficulties as me. And that's why I think it's important to do it. And I remind myself of that.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I can totally relate. The same when I go to put stuff out there, I'm like, oh, what are my friends going to think of this? And I'm like, I'm not actually here to speak to them. It doesn't matter if they're uncomfortable with it because they're not actually who I'm showing up to speak to. I'm showing up to those who need that help, support, guidance, whatever it is. Like you say, the person that's looking for that support that we in our past lives couldn't find. So I totally agree with that it's great that you're putting yourself out there, even if, your closest friends are like, what is she doing?
And it is hard for them because they're like, oh, but aren't you worried about it? And it's like, I'm not worried about anything. And I can't worry about it because yeah, if you worried all the time, no one would move forward. We all have worries. Like, I wouldn't have started my business if I let worries get in the way.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, it's about that law of attraction, that you're going to attract the right people by putting the right stuff out there. So if you go around trying to people please and put up what people will approve of, you're not going to attract the right people into your life and into your business. So tell us more about your business and your podcast and what it is that you're actually doing for people, because you've got a few different things going on.
I do. I'm a busy lady. I tell people what I do and they're like, how many hours do you have in the day? But I've recently gotten help in the business, which is good because I needed it. So Plum, essentially, when I started Plum, its goal was just to be like an external marketing manager for businesses and do what I'd done internally for businesses. And then I realized, actually, no, I don't want to do that. I want to specialize and do what I love doing, which is actually empowering business owners to love their marketing. Because the biggest thing I would always get told is, I'm overwhelmed. I hate marketing. Like, it's just so stressful. And I was like, but it's really not. It actually should be the funnest part of your business, because it's about putting what you want and your dream out into the world, right? So you should have a love relationship with it. So I started really just working with businesses on like a done for you kind of retainer way. But now I've actually just opened it's called Marketing Mastery Community. And it's people can join and actually like take control of their marketing that way. And it's like just 6 months of me coaching and just essentially sitting in your back pocket, like they're ready whenever someone needs some help, weekly check-ins and things like that. So I've launched that recently because I realized I was doing a lot of strategy days because people couldn't necessarily, because agency retainers in marketing world, they're expensive. Like, and a lot of smaller businesses or even medium businesses are not quite there yet, or they have a really great receptionist that maybe they just need to train her up or him up, and it's like, well, like use someone like me to actually help mentor and coach them, and then you'll end up building that marketing in your own business. So really that's probably the way I'm going. I still do retainers for people, and that's why I've gotten help in the business. So I've got really good SEO specialists that I work with now, and really good Facebook ad teams and things like that. So just really building the capabilities around what I can offer business owners to make sure they get the best, because you can be, I can't be a one size fits all kind of business. Like, what is that saying? Jack of all trades, master of none. And that was the one thing I never wanted to do, because especially with marketing, because there's so many different elements and things involved that you can't know all of it. So then I also, because I love being in service. So, and I only realized that in the last year. I'm like, I'm a huge talker. Anyone watching this will be getting that. So I launched a marketing. So I launched a marketing podcast called Marketing Espresso. And it's just literally something you can listen to when you're having your coffee in the morning and give you a tip on your marketing. That was the whole goal around it. Twice weekly, just 10, maximum it ever goes for is 10 minutes. So if you're slowly drinking your coffee, that's a good app for you. But I released it thinking, like 1 or 2 people might listen occasionally. It gets, over 20 listens on an episode when I release it every single time within the first week. So it's crazy, like popular. Didn't expect that, but it's good. So that's that. And then on the other side, I guess, like the Chappell side of things, which is very different. I'm really trying to normalize conversations around grief, because I think in our society, and especially since I've gone through a lot of it, so I feel like I can talk to the ways that I've done it really, really well and done it really, really badly. So, my avoidance in my young 20s led to obvious chronic anxiety and depression. I was already pretty depressed, but it was just sitting there a bit dormant, or not, on the surface. So I talk about grief and obviously mental health and how they tie in together a lot. And having been through grief in so many different kind of ways, like job losses, the loss of my husband, because, divorce is a whole other level of grief. And then obviously the loss of, 2 fathers now, because I was unfortunately there to see my father-in-law die almost a year ago to the day. So it's been a pretty interesting life dealing with different sorts of grief. And so my mission is to make people realize that in grief and mental health battles, and when you're feeling at that rock bottom, there is a way up. It's just about, it's actually about you. It's not about the environment. It's actually not about what's happened to you as such. It's about how you can kind of reframe it and see how it can be your catalyst to change. Because I think even if we're doing okay from grief and we think that we're all good, we can still look at someone's life as a celebration, but also take the learnings that they wanted us to see and kind of grow and develop our lives from there. So I launched a podcast, another one, because I just love talking. I launched another one called Beautiful Not Broken. And yeah, that's probably it's my absolute passion, and it's my absolute joy to just talk to people about, how they can, rebuild their life and how they can. It just sometimes we just have a yarn. Like this week, I've got a really great woman on called Nikki Shah, and she has created this awesome company called My Muse, which was created through the loss of her partner to cancer when, she was quite young. So really, really, it's just a podcast around trying to bring people, I guess, hope and something relatable in a world where a lot of stuff is not relatable.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love that you've got so many passion projects going and that you're able to do this. If you're still stuck in that corporate grind, you'd probably be too stressed out and not have the time to be doing all these other passion projects. So that's awesome. So what would you say to someone that's either stuck in that 9-to-5 grind, or maybe they've been made redundant, that's thinking about starting a business, but maybe they're a bit too scared to go?
Just do it. Okay, the thing I would say with it, if you're in the 9-to-5 grind and it's depending on your workload, because I know with my workload as when I left my 9-to-5s, I was a CMO. So, I was quite senior. I had a lot on my plate. I wouldn't have had time to create a side hustle, even if I wanted to. And a lot of people would ask me for marketing advice, and I'd be like, nah, guys, like I'm just so busy with my job. Like I don't. And because also your brain's at a capacity too, right? Because there's only so much you can do without burning out. So if you have the capability without burnout to start a side hustle, go that path, because it's a lot gentler. Whereas, like just the break and start can be very, very terrifying. But if you've been made redundant, or, the company's gone insolvent and you're lucky enough to have gotten a nice pay pack from that, and you've been thinking about doing your own thing, then I would say 100% just take the dive. Just do it, because you've got nothing to lose. What's the worst that could happen? I would say give it 6 months. And then if you're nowhere in 6 months, that was sort of what I gave myself. I said, if I don't have a paycheck within 6 months, no go. And then the other thing I would say is you already know your first customer. Like, honestly, I had my first customer in 2 weeks. You already know them. They're in your network. Once again, Janine Garner talks about this a lot. She's actually written a whole book on it. It's really good. So if anyone's looking for a book recommendation. But she talks about
coming up.
Yeah, she talks about knowing your network and identifying your key 12, and you definitely already know your first customer in that. So I think, if you have the opportunity, just cut and go for it, and don't listen to anyone that tells you that. Listen to advice, but from people that you would take advice from. Like, by that I mean, sometimes your uncle or your nephew or, your sister, even your sister. Like, my family was great. I've had nothing but support. But, I know some people that are like, oh, my dad said X, Y, Z. Or, I did actually have one person say to me, oh, don't worry, this company will fail, but maybe next one won't. And I was like, I don't care. Failure doesn't scare me. But you will definitely have. But find a network and do what I said, like success leaves breadcrumbs. So, find the people that you also want to kind of have a look at how they've structured things, and don't be afraid to ask them for help, because people are pretty bloody nice in the entrepreneur world. So, always ask.
Yeah, and I relate to that. Similar that you said, success leaves breadcrumbs. I've always heard it as success leaves clues. So it's always good to hear quotes in slightly different ways. And you're right about the advice thing. I think, I can't remember how it goes, but it's always like, take advice from someone that's in a place that you want to be in. Your uncle or whatever who's trying to bring you down. If you look at his life, it's like, do you want his life? No. So why would you listen to him? Go find your friend's auntie who's successful in the industry, or not even in the same industry, but has the lifestyle that you desire. That's the sort of person you want to take advice from, because they actually know how to get to the place you're trying to go.
Yeah. And the thing I've learned about really successful, happy, authentic people is they're not afraid to tell you what they're doing.
Oh.
Like they don't withhold, like they're happy. Like if someone comes up to me tomorrow, like for example, like I'm happy to say anything, you know, like, because at the end of the day, if it helps someone, oh, that doesn't affect me.
No. Plenty to go around.
Yeah.
So moving on to confidence, thank you so much for sharing your story and what you do. So what does confidence mean to you?
I think, you know what's interesting? This is the second time in 2 weeks I've been asked this question.
There you go.
Yeah,
answer going to town.
One of my clients, she runs an amazing like leadership development program, but she often will go and do these like meditation weekends. And she went to one, and one of the monks said, confidence is to confide. And I was like, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. But it was like, when you literally break the word down, it's confide. And I was like, oh, that's so true.
Oh, yeah.
So prior to having heard that revelation, I would have said confidence is about, it's a practice. It's not a destination, and it's something you have to wake up every morning and really, you have to decide to be confident. Like I have days I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I shouldn't have eaten a whole pizza last night. I feel fat. I feel bloated. Like, and then for me, because my body is definitely like a big trigger for me with my confidence. Because I know if I feel like but the thing is also, if you're feeling a bit shit, well, dress up. I've done that the whole lockdown. Like I know people like, oh, I was going to meetings in hoodies and trackies. And I was like, well, no wonder you felt like shit. Like I woke up, do my makeup most days, especially my eyebrows because they don't exist. And like, so in Sydney, we've just gone through this like epic, I think we're 120 or something days into like, we're Freedom Day today though. So yay. But we, you know, during
Don't tell Melbourne that you've got a day out though.
I feel so sorry for Melbourne. Like Melbourne's a whole other, like I'm giving advice based on what I did through lockdown to bring confidence to myself. Because I think, especially in a pandemic, having confidence is really challenging because you're away. Because I think confidence for me, I'm an extrovert, so I get energy and confidence from other people too. I love people reaffirming what I'm thinking. Like I need constant reassurance. I've learned I love it, but when I don't get it, I have to say, get internal validation. I'm like, no, Beck, you've done a good job, or you know, and I think that's the thing about confidence. It's a practice, and it's about showing up, but also knowing when you're not showing up. And sometimes that's okay. Like sometimes you're just gonna have a day where you feel shitty, and that's fine, and just have that day. But if you have a day where you know, like you've got a big meeting or something, it is about like dress nicely, like, you know, present, like put in the effort and know why you're doing it, and believe like you're there to do the best work that you can, and you will. Like, and also they say there's so much about posture, and also like I've been watching Ted Lasso and I love that show. It's so good. And the I can't think of her name, but the owner of the football club, she shows up and she's like, before every meeting, I like stand tall. It's like, I just stand tall and I take up room and I take up presence. And I'm like, that, all of these little things that you do, these nuances, they're all to build your confidence because they're who you are.
Yeah, I love that. And I was the same. I put my makeup on every day during, you know, lockdowns and stuff. It just lifts you. Like if you've got your face done, you're like, I can't lounge around now, can I? And just getting out of your pajamas, you know, the odd day where I'd stay in my pajamas, nothing was happening.
I kind of feel like I should have had more pajama days though, because now that we're coming out of like this lockdown, I've got this really interesting thing going on for me where it's like, I don't want to go back to busy. Like I don't.
Oh, no, neither.
It's weird. Like I love going out, but it's like I still have really enjoyed this like this time, you know, just to breathe.
Yeah, same. What else? You just made me lose my train of thought. I was just going to comment on something else you said, and now it's totally gone. It might come back, but That's right. It might come back. So how do you help people build their confidence through the work that you're doing?
In their marketing, I think, well, two prongs. I think I've had a lot of feedback from the podcast Beautiful Not Broken, that people have listened and felt like they weren't alone, which I think that's part of confidence as well, is having a tribe, like, and having people that relate and having people you can go, hey, like, this is coming up for me. Yeah. So doing that. And then I think in their marketing, I love when one of my clients the other week, and I burst into tears, like, this this is how real I am with my clients. Like, she calls me and she's like, oh my God, I had 2 new people come on, like, into her program, which she'd been really struggling to sell spots. And I was like, I'm so happy for you. Like, and I realized, like, for her, she had been so nervous to put her why she was doing what she was doing into the world. And all she needed was me to really back her and be like, you have to do this, not for you. It's not about you. I get that you're a little bit uncomfortable. I get it. But we don't have to say anything you're not willing to say, but we do have to sell your story. Like, your story is why people are buying you. You're a coach. Like, this is what you need to be doing and need to be delivering to the world. And I think as soon as she started doing it and she saw how much people would comment and relate, and it lights her up, and that lights me up, because if my customers are happy and they're getting results and they're getting the money they want, because, you know, let's face it, money's not a dirty thing. If you don't have money, you can't have impact, right? So it's, you know, and the more people they touch and the more people that they, you know, help, because they're all, generally everyone I work with is doing something to help other people. They're all in service. So the more people they touch, the better for me too, because then I can be like, I helped that happen and I feel good. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who's wanting to build their confidence but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I think especially last year when I hit rock bottom, I found out that my ex had been in love with someone else. Right. Then yeah. So there was a lot that played out there for me. Was I not good enough? Is she prettier than me? And I actually knew the girl, so it was even harder, because I knew what she brought to the table, and I was like, what does she have that I don't have? And then I got stuck in this comparisonitis, which I think, if someone's wanting to build their confidence, the first thing I say to you is, anyone that makes you feel like you need to compare yourself, or anyone that makes you feel less than, you don't need them in your life. And if they're a family member, then politely set boundaries. And I think that was a big thing. I had never learned how to set a boundary with anyone. I didn't know what boundaries were. I thought that would be being rude, because, like, I'm a people pleaser, right? So learning the boundary thing, and then also, you know, this woman had always made me feel less than. And, you know, obviously there was reason for that. So I immediately removed her from my life. And anyone that kind of was involved in that sort of way that I felt and things, I just casually distanced myself. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to be rude. You know, I just sort of said, no, you know, thank you, but no, thank you. Like, it's not for me anymore. And there's nothing wrong with outgrowing people, and there's nothing wrong with taking your own journey. You don't have to be rude about it. But the truth is that sometimes in life, people just don't align anymore, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Like, it does feel like the end of the world. Losing friends can be really challenging. But I say, if you want to change your life and you want to build your confidence, start looking for people that have done what you want to do. And I think start finding, you know, people like yourself, and start looking at people. Change your Instagram feed. Stop following the Kardashians, for God's sakes. Like, honestly, get rid of all the influencers that don't have anything positive, or they don't bring you impact in a good way, because we are curating our own lives. I don't follow anyone negative on social media. The minute someone posts something that I deem is a bit shit, they're out. Like, if it triggered, but then if it's me being triggered, then I look at me. But I don't, I don't watch shows where it's like, I wouldn't watch, The Real Housewives, or I don't watch anything where there's catty behavior. I've stopped watching The Bachelor. I've stopped watching all of these things that make people fight against each other for the sake of people's enjoyment at home. I think it's ridiculous. And I think that is why we have women or even men, because men obviously struggle with their confidence too. But I think that is the whole reason why we have people that don't love themselves, because they have shows telling them they need Botox to love themselves. And they're seeking validation everywhere else. They're being told that they have to be in a relationship to be happy. They have to do all of these things to be happy. You don't have to do anything. You just have to find out who you are. You're never going to be happy if you're constantly seeking validation from everyone else. So I think that's probably the most important first step to make, is deciding that you really want to do it and committing to it, because it's not about getting a gym membership. It's not about buying new face cream. It's not about wearing heaps of makeup. It's not about getting a gorgeous boyfriend. It's actually about you.
Yeah, that's so true. Lots of great advice there. So what's something you know now that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Oh, I wish. Oh my God. I wish. I don't regret anything I've done in my life. I think that everything has led me to this beautiful point that I'm at now. And I think if I hadn't have had all of the lessons along the way, and look, to be honest, when it comes to my ex-husband, I'm nothing but grateful for him. I think he taught me the biggest lesson that I ever had to learn. And I'm so thankful for that. Like, I'm deeply, deeply thankful for that experience, actually. But if I could tell myself one thing when I was younger, it's probably stop being so mean to yourself. Like, have a nice conversation with yourself from time to time, because you're doing a really bloody good job. And I think when I was younger, I really was so harsh on myself. Like, I was harsh about the way I looked. I was harsh about everything I put in my body. I was harsh about not being able to I was harsh if I was single. I was like, oh, obviously. And I was always seeking external validation. And now that I look back, I'm like, wow, if you just spent so much energy loving yourself internally, you probably would have attracted better situations to myself. But also, I think I had to have those lessons though. And I think I just wish I'd loved myself a little bit more when I was younger.
Yeah, for sure. So what's your favorite book or podcast in terms of confidence, personal development, business?
I listen to so many podcasts.
I
love Erica Kramer has a good one. The Confidence Chronicles. That's a good one. Business wise, I don't really listen to business podcasts. I'm not.
I'll put out there in case there were any, but
I just started listening to Osher Gunsberg's podcast, Better Than Yesterday. That's a really good mental health one. And then I also love listening to Life Uncut, just for some laughs, because those girls are hilarious. But it is really it's a bit of a trashy one. Not it's great, but I shouldn't say trashy, but as in it's not. It's one to listen to when you've listened to too many self-development ones, right? And the other one I love is Do You Fucking Mind as well. That's another really good one. Books. Oh my God, I literally read a book a week. I'm obsessed with reading. I read for an hour before bedtime every night. But books that have really had huge impacts on my life would have to be Jay Shetty's Think Like a Monk.
Yes. Yeah. Number one.
Huge book. Confidence Feels Like Shit is another really good one by Erica Kramer. Actually, I get coached by Erica Kramer, so I'm plugging her, but she is actually fantastic as well. Be Brilliant by Janine Garner was another really good one. Oh my God, I wrote a list of the 5 best books, but I can't remember off the top of my head what the other ones were. But Jay Shetty's book was Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. That was quite impactful. Really, and I read that just as I was going through my separation. because it was all about learning to surrender to what's happening in the world, because I was very much a control freak prior to that. So it was really challenging to not have control over the situation, which I didn't. I had no control.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, as you were talking throughout this about your growth journey at the start of, last year and stuff, in my mind, I was thinking, I wonder if she's read Think Like a Monk. Like, it was actually ticking in my mind. I'm like, I feel like she's read that book.
Yeah, that book, I think everyone should read that book. I think, the other book I think everyone should read from a science point of view, not necessarily from a personal development, is Humankind. That is a really good book about it, actually, because there's so many studies done around how we're actually taught to believe that our fellow human is like almost evil and like they're selfish and greedy. But this actually debunks that, and it actually talks about how we're actually people of a community. Like, we don't, and it's a really good read. So that's another one that's had a huge impact on my life too.
Yeah, no, I'll have to add that to my list. So do you have any favorite people to follow online? Like you said about clearing out Instagram feed, who's your favorite people to fill up your Instagram feed?
Well, Jay Shetty, like, definitely. Mark Manson. I love Mark Manson.
I love his posts. I'm like, yes.
Yes, he's so good. Eric is a good one. Queen of Confidence. She's good. There's so many. I have a beautifully curated feed. Like, it's because there's so many little people out. Well, they're not little, but like there's so many smaller accounts out there that just like pump out inspiration. I started following, I think it's called Moon Omens, and it's like affirmations and like, today this is going to happen. And I'm like, yeah, cool. All right.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
Yeah, just stuff like that. Like, I think anyone that's just posting, for me, it's just all about good vibes and like inspiration, and also like people that are willing to share their story so that you can relate to them. Like, I love people that are really like raw and honest, especially on Instagram, because there's just so much like shit on there.
Yeah, that's true. That's great. Yeah. So where can people find and connect with you?
So I'm generally on, I'd say Insta's probably my biggest one if you're looking for inspiration from me, it's at Beck_Chappell, which is PPELL. And then I'm on LinkedIn as Rebeca Chappell, which I always joke is very, very formal. But that's where they can find me from, like, probably a business point of view. I do post a little bit of my personal stuff on there too, and my podcast interviews. And then, of course, they can I'd love them to take a listen to Beautiful Not Broken. I think that's kind of my legacy at the moment. And then hopefully this time next year, there'll be a nice book to add to the mix. So, I mean, I'm working on it now. I'm 3 chapters in, and I owe my editor some stuff by the end of October. So I'm kind of on deadline.
Is it a personal storybook or a marketing book?
It's a book about grief and the way, like, for me, because I found when I went through my journey, or avoided the journey at first and then went through it, literally last year, I couldn't find anything that was relatable on the bookshelves. Like, I'm a reader. I'm even with the podcast, I couldn't find. There was a few like podcasts out there, but they made it very stuffy. And for me, my whole thing is about making it really like relatable and real. That, it's just something we're all going to have to deal with at some point in our life. Like, no one avoids grief. Like, it could be your pet, it could be job loss, divorce, relationship breakdown, the actual death of someone in your family, like a friend. None of us are getting out without experiencing grief. And I feel like, yes, the 5 stages are true, but there's a whole other element that no one talks about, which is also the celebration of grief. Like, it's a really important time in our life to go inwards. And many of us miss that catalyst, I think, for change. Yeah,
that's beautiful. So I look forward to seeing that when it comes out then. You have to let me know. So,
I know, I can't wait, actually, because I feel like once I've done that, I've already started thinking about a second one. I'm like, can you just stop, Beck? Like, just stop.
Focus.
I know. I need to have those blinkers that horses wear.
I'm the same. Do you have any final words before we go that you want to share?
Thank you for having me. I think it's been a really great chat. And, you know, I hope that anyone watching this, it's been really helpful and they've gotten some nuggets out of it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we will see you all next week.
Bye.
See you guys.